All right, well, greetings, everyone. We're now Van and Vivian here and ready to continue on with our study in this being Paul's first epistle to the Corinthians. Um, so the lead verse that we have for the study, which is not changing, it'll be the lead verse all the way through this study of First Corinthians, is that there should be no schism in the body, that the members should have the same care one for another.
Put it up on the big screen.
Okay. Oh, yeah.
There it is.
There we go. I was looking at the small screen. That's why it wasn't up on your screen. All right. And the audience here is very specific. So, and we're going to cover that. In the past, when I've heard others, when I myself have taught or attempted to go through First Corinthians, there are things that I see now that I just didn't see before. So the study now is divided. This is a dispensational study. It is rightly divided. There are differences, and those groups need to be divided. Otherwise, we end up with confusion. We're using a King James Bible. It is the Bible that is, for our purposes, worthy of study, and for words that we don't understand, which there are many, we use the Oxford English Dictionary. All right, and this is our social media presence. We have a website, midaxvancouver.ca. At our website, if you go to the contact tab, there's a listener survey that's going on. We just heard from somebody now in Scotland, way up the north end of Scotland, Gerald. So we have Alistair
and Gerald.
Alistair and Gerald in Scotland, both in Scotland. So greetings to those brethren. We have our YouTube and Rumble presence and Facebook. I'm not on Facebook, but Vivian is pervasively there. You can connect with her. All right, so we are going to spend just a moment here. I don't, at the risk of being tedious, and I don't want to be tedious. This is Paul's second missionary journey, where he was at Corinth, and now he has proceeded to Ephesus. And it is from Ephesus that he's writing back to Corinth. He has actually received questions from them in Corinth. And in part, he's responding to those questions, which we will be experiencing his responses. Moreover, he has things to say to them beyond what he has said in person. Now, Paul's primary audience, and this is so important, because if I don't get this, then the letter to the Corinthians is going to be very difficult to understand. There are some statements in here. We're going to go across some of them today. And if I don't understand the audience and the times and the circumstances, then I'm going to be absolutely baffled as to what's going on. Now, this is what Paul says, 1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 1 and 2, which Vivian will read.
1 Corinthians chapter 9, verses 1 and 2. Am I not an apostle? Am I not free? Have I not seen Jesus Christ our Lord? Are not ye my work in the Lord? If I be not an apostle unto others, yet doubtless I am to you. For the seal of mine apostleship are ye in the Lord.
Now, the words I so important for me to point out is, if I be not an apostle unto others. And those would be Hebrews. There were Hebrews that he was admittedly here not an apostle of. But then his audience, he says, doubtless I am to you. That audience, the called to be saints. He references them, 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 2. We know to whom he is writing. He's not writing to the saints specifically, although there's content in his letter which is worthy of the attention of the saints, but he's writing specifically to those to whom he is the apostle, the called to be saints. And now we'll look at this verse 2 of chapter 1.
1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 2. Unto the church of God which is at Corinth, to them that are sanctified in Christ Jesus, called to be saints, with all that in every place call upon the name of Jesus Christ our Lord, both theirs and ours.
Okay, so now that we've pointed out, and this is worthy of being pointed out again, the church of God is the church that was started in Jerusalem. It was the church of God. It was the church that believed the gospel of God, that Jesus is the promised Messiah, the one that was promised. The promise of God has been fulfilled. There was a church, and Peter preached the gospel of God to that church in Jerusalem. Now this church has other locations. There is a church of God which now is at Corinth. And then in that church are others. They are those of the church of God to whom Paul is not an apostle. And we have understood now that this would be the saints. The saints are referenced 1 Corinthians 14:33. Paul admitted that he was not an apostle to the saints. I've never had this pointed out to me. I had to find it for myself. And if you think I'm doing violence to the text, then you should let me know, because I'm doing everything I can to properly understand things. So Paul is writing, he says, to the church of God, and he talks about others, and he talks about theirs. And then to his audience, the called to be saints, he says, these are the ye, these are the you, and these are the ours. So there is a group, there are two groups here in Corinth, and this is where there is to be no schism. There is to be no schism between these two groups. So this study, when we say it's dispensational, we're talking about division now at a level of detail that is much greater than I've ever before been exposed to. The study sees a distinction between the saints, which were started in Jerusalem, and the called to be saints, which did not exist until Paul. God called them through Paul, and they were called to be saints. These happen to be those that were Hebrew. They were uncircumcised. We know that there are uncircumcised saints because there's a warning to those that are uncircumcised. So now both the saints and the called to be saints both of them are of the household of God. Though they are different groups of people, but they share the same in the fact that they are both Hebrews, but they are different in terms of their upbringing. We also, as partakers of the benefit, so I'm not a called to be saint, I'm not a saint, I'm not a called to be saint, I am a partaker of the benefit. 1 Timothy 6:2, that's where I fit in. And I also, along with all believers, and during this dispensation of grace, are part of the household of God. We're all there, but we are, as Jesus said to his disciples, in my Father's house are many mansions. So there are many dwelling places, and there's a little bit of a distinction. Okay, but no schism, no separation. All right, so let's jump in. We left off last time at 1 Corinthians 3:15, and Vivian will now read verses 16 and 17.
1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 16 and 17. Know ye not that ye are the temple of God, and that the Spirit of God dwelleth in you? If any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy, for the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are.
All right, so right away now we're into some very challenging language, and when I went through this study of 1 Corinthians some years ago, I struggled to understand this, and everyone that I heard, even those that are dispensational, they struggle with this because it just is so hard to understand. Know ye not that ye are the temple of God? and that spirit, the Spirit of God dwelleth in you. Well, all right. Yep, I can understand that. But that is limited to Paul's audience, the call to be saints, and to all of us who are partakers of the benefit, all of us that believe God unto salvation. The Spirit of God dwelleth in us. That's the you. It started, though, with the call to be saints. Now, Colossians 1:27.
Colossians 1:27, to whom God would make known what is the riches of the glory of this mystery among the Gentiles, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory.
So this was a mystery in that the saints, the Hebrews, did not know that the Gentiles would have Christ dwelling in you. In fact, even the devil himself did not know this. So which is Christ in you? Now in Ephesians 1:13.
Ephesians 1:13, in whom ye also trusted, after that ye heard the word of truth, the gospel of your salvation, in whom also after that ye believed, ye were sealed with that Holy Spirit of promise.
Sorry, on that last click there, I had fallen asleep. Ye were sealed with that Holy Spirit of promise. That's a very important statement. It's very important because Paul says to the saints, the called to be saints, the Spirit of God dwelleth in you. Now, what's important, why this is important, is that we note, and Judy, you've got Psalm 51:11, the gospel of God saints, those saints that were in Jerusalem, the saints there were not sealed. Thus, the Spirit could come and go. That's why David said the words of Psalm 51:11. Judy.
Cast me not away from thy presence, and take not thy Holy Spirit from me.
Okay, thank you, Judy. So the point is, Paul is saying to his audience, he says, the Spirit of God dwelleth in you. Well, how could he be sure of that unless he was speaking to an audience that he knew would not have the Spirit taken away? David was concerned that his behavior could cause the Spirit to come and go. Now, the gospel of Christ, well, the gospel of Christ is distinct from the gospel of God. It is the gospel that Paul preached to the called to be saints, and because of that gospel, they were sealed and they were seated. Now that's Ephesians 1:13 and 2:6. So we know from those two verses that Paul speaks about to those saints that ye are sealed and ye are seated in heavenly places. That's why Paul could say, God dwelleth in you. He can't say that to the saints. Now, it's important to sink in, because if I don't let that sink in, then I'm not going to be able to follow what Paul is saying.
And it's the difference between the gospel which was preached to the saints of the Church of God and the saints through Paul.
Right. And so we've also have understood that the gospel of God, which concerns the promised Messiah, that's Romans chapter 1, verses 1 to 4. That's the promise. That is the gospel that was preached in Jerusalem. It was to the saints. The gospel of Christ was the mystery gospel, that his death, burial, and resurrection was the mechanism by which God can save me.
And seal you.
And seal me. And declare me already seated in heavenly places. Okay. Now, we're still in some very challenging wording here. So Paul says, ye, that's the context now, or the called to be saints. He says, ye, called to be saints, are the temple of God. He knows that because he has afore said to them that they're seated and they're sealed. If any man defile, There's a challenging word, defile. If any man defile the temple of God. So what is to defile? To defile is to render morally foul, to corrupt. That's from the Oxford English Dictionary. So if you want to know what that word really means, it's morally foul. The temple of God. And then we have these words, him shall God destroy. Boy, this is really challenging to understand if I don't understand the audience. Now, when I look up the word destroy in the Oxford English Dictionary, there are multiple senses that the word by which the word is defined. One, the second sense is to ruin, that is men. So a man can say, I'm ruined, and he was speaking of his worldly estate. There's times that have men that say during the collapse of the stock market, that a man might consider himself ruined. And that's one sense. Then there is sense number 4, which is to put out of existence. That's reference to living beings. That is to deprive of life. So him shall God destroy. Are we talking about depriving life? And then the 7th sense, which I've decided to share, is to consign or give over to perdition. So now we say, well, which one are we dealing with? Well, we're gonna wait until we get to the situation, and then we'll come to a better understanding. But this is the declaration: if any man defile the temple of God, him shall God destroy. So we don't take this word destroy as bravado from God, that he's making some threat. This is actually a judgment of God. Now, such a situation and the Apostle Paul's response could only occur at the time of the call to be saints. Now, that'll become apparent as we go through this. So this matter of defiling the temple of God and him shall God destroy is something that was limited to the time that the called to be saints were on the earth. They have all moved on. They've left the earth. They're in the heavenly places. The saints are no longer here. So we're talking about something that happened, and there's an occurrence of this defilement of the temple of God in Corinth when we get to chapter 5. So it's not very far away. We will cover this, and we'll cover it in...
Not today.
Not today. You're going to have to stay tuned, and we will cover it in sufficient detail that I suspect you will not, again, be challenged by it. All right, let's look ahead into chapter 5 just to see what we're talking about. Chapter 5, verse 1 Corinthians 5:1, Vivian.
1 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 1. So we are going to take a peek.
This is just a peek see.
It is reported commonly that there is fornication among you.
Now, among the you, who's our audience? Paul's audience, the called to be saints. These are Hebrew Gentiles. We call them Gentiles because they're uncircumcised. So Paul says, there's fornication among you called to be saints.
And such fornication as is not as so much as named among the Gentiles.
Now, who are these Gentiles? These are Gentiles of the nations. We understand that from Genesis 10:5. There are the Gentile nations. They also are uncircumcised.
That one should have his father's wife.
Okay, so there is a concise statement about what it was, what the defilement was. Now, Paul was not in Corinth when this deed occurred. How Paul deals with this deed will clarify our understanding of the word destroy that we have just read in 1 Corinthians 3:17a. Now, Paul has more instruction to the Corinthians in his second epistle, now in 2 Corinthians, and we'll take a peek see at this as well. Now, you'll see here how the situation progressed in Paul's words.
2 Corinthians, the later letter, 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verses 6 through 9. Sufficient to such a man is this punishment, which was inflicted of many. So that, contrariwise, ye ought rather to forgive him and comfort him.
Now, so the ye, again, are the called to be saints. That's who he's speaking to. And Paul says, comfort. He says to forgive and to comfort him. Okay. And
Oh, sorry.
yeah.
And comfort him, lest perhaps such a one should be swallowed up with overmuch sorrow. Wherefore, I beseech you that you would confirm your love toward him.
So these are Paul's instructions. This one who has done such a deed is now, Paul's giving instructions to the called to be saints at Corinth: forgive, comfort, and confirm your love toward him. So, and that is he that hath done this deed. We'll see those words, 1 Corinthians 5:2. And then these final words.
Okay, so we're still in 2 Corinthians
Yeah.
chapter 2, verse 9. For to this end also did I write, that I might know the proof of you, whether ye be obedient in all things.
And notice these things. So when Paul says to forgive and to comfort and to confirm your love, Paul expects the called to be saints to be obedient. He is their apostle, and these things they are to obey. All right, let's go back now to where we are in 1 Corinthians chapter 3. We'll pick up now at 17b. So we've just talked now about the defilement of the temple. Him shall God destroy.
For the temple of God is holy, which temple ye are.
All right. So it's holy. How do we know the temple is holy? Because Paul says in Ephesians 4:24,
Ephesians 4:24, and that ye put on the new man, which after God is created in righteousness and true holiness.
All right. So the believer today, starting back here with the call to be saints, those called to be saints, as the believer today during this continuing dispensation of grace, we have a new man. So he tells them, ye, you called to be saints, put on the new man, which after God is created in true holiness. So Paul can then say to the Corinthians, you're the temple of God, which is holy, because they have, as we have a new creature, and it is created in true holiness. And he says, ye are the temple, and you are holy. So we have both an old man in us and a new man in us. And so my note here is that the new man of both the called to be saints and partakers of the benefit, 1 Timothy 6:2, is one of true holiness. So you and I have confidence that we have already been perfected, although I really can't display much perfection yet. You'll have to put up with the old man of me for most of the time.
We still have the old man.
We still have the old man, which tends to operate this. He's the one who operates this body the most of the time. And so I'm oftentimes in my old man. But with the believer, during this dispensation, we have a new man. And that new man is righteous and true, holy, created
in right,
and is already, and this is the creation that is already seated in heavenly places. So the new man, that you put on the new man. I can put on the new man, but it doesn't tend to last very long. The old man wants to run things. Okay, let's move along. Now we're going into verses 18 to 23.
1 Corinthians chapter 3, verses 18 through 23. Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, He taketh the wise in their own craftiness. And again, the Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, that they are vain. Therefore, let no man glory in men, for all things are yours. Whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas, or the world, or life, or death, or things present, or things to come, all are yours. And ye are Christ's, and Christ is God's.
Okay, so let's take a look in detail here. What Paul is saying, verse 18 of chapter 3. Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. So the point here being that the call to be saints were survivors of the economy at that time. They had to learn to be wise in this present world, which is what Paul is speaking of at that time, in order for them to survive, to do commerce, to deal with people of the world. Now, Paul he's now running contrary to what was their common experience. So they being perfect, these called to be saints were now perfect. And because they were perfect, they were no longer to depend on worldly wisdom. Now, this is unique to the call to be saints. We are perfect as well. We know that from 1 Corinthians 2:6.
1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 6. Howbeit, we speak wisdom among them that are perfect, yet not the wisdom of this world, nor of the princes of this world that come to naught.
So we are perfect, but that is the new man that is perfect. The call to be saints, were to depend and to work. They were to put on, and they were to do their work, their service, exercise their gift in their vocation in the new man, which is perfect. So they were not to conduct themselves and operate themselves with worldly wisdom. Now, we do this today, and it's a matter of how we operate. I'm not a call to be saints, so I'm not under the injunction of Paul to not use any other wisdom in this world. They were not to depend on the world. God was to take care of them. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God, for it is written, He taketh the wise in their own craftiness. And we have Job.
Job chapter 5, verse 13. He taketh the wise in their own craftiness, and the counsel of the froward is carried headlong.
Interesting word, froward. What is a froward? Perverse, ungovernable. So he taketh the wise in their own craftiness, and the counsel of the froward, that is the ungovernable, is carried headlong. That is rushing forward with ungoverned speed. So that's God's judgment, assessment, and it's spoken of here in Job chapter 5, verse 13. So craftiness is what is being talked about here. There is a certain craftiness of those that are of the world. And again, the Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, that they are vain. Now, you know the word vain means futile, empty.
Psalm 94, verse 11. The Lord knoweth the thoughts of man, that they are vanity.
Okay, so there's that word vanity and the word vain. And this is what Paul is saying when he says, and again, the Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, that they are vain. That comes from Psalm 94:11. Okay, now, before we move forward, we want to look again at 1 Corinthians 18, chapter 3, verses 18 to 23, just to refresh the context, because we're going to go into some matters here that if I have forgotten what has been previously said, this will be very hard to understand.
1 Corinthians chapter 3, 18 to 23, again for context. Let no man deceive himself. If any man among you seemeth to be wise in this world, let him become a fool, that he may be wise. For the wisdom of this world is foolishness with God. For it is written, He taketh the wise in their own craftiness. And again, the Lord knoweth the thoughts of the wise, that they are vain.
Okay, so those are verses we've just been through. Now, as we continue ahead, we see.
This is verse 24.
Yeah.
Therefore, let no man glory in men, for all things are yours. Whether Paul or Apollos or Cephas or the world or life or death or things present or things to come, all are yours. And ye are Christ's, and Christ is God's. Oh, sorry,
Okay.
it wasn't verse 24.
Yeah, no, it's okay. It's good. So we have now in these last verses we have of chapter 3, Paul starts with therefore. So the therefore reflects on all the things that Paul has previously said. He says, therefore, let no man glory in men. So my comment here is that therefore we need to remember what Paul wrote before this therefore. And so let's start with, first of all, remembering who were the called to be saints. That is Paul's audience. Now, I don't want to be tedious on this, but this is detail that may have slipped by. So let's take a closer look at it again, that they were Hebrew Gentile men. They were uncircumcised Hebrew of no esteemed reputation. So you would say, well, how do you know, Van, that they are of no esteemed reputation? We'll look at Paul's words. How do we know this? They were uneesteemed men. And we see that here in 1 Corinthians chapter 1. So in order to understand all things are yours, we have to go all the way back to chapter 1. Remember who are called.
1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 26 through 29. For ye see your calling, brethren, how that not many wise men after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble, are called. But God hath chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God hath chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty, and base things of the world, and things which are despised hath God chosen, yea, and things which are not, to bring to naught things that are, that no flesh should glory in his presence.
Okay, so all of that, so that no flesh, there's the explanation, that no flesh should glory in his presence. So who were the called to be saints? Paul's audience. We said that they were unesteemed men. How do we know this? This is what Paul says. They were chosen mostly from the following criteria. There were not many wise after the flesh, not many mighty, not many noble. That's who Paul was calling. God had him called those type of men. Now, God through Paul called men considered foolish, weak, base, and those despised. Well, that doesn't sound like a very great group of saints.
You wouldn't hire those for your job, for your business.
I would. So this is who God is, and he's doing this, and the purpose he's doing this is he wants the glory to go to him. The call to be saints then were to operate not in worldly wisdom, but they were to operate in the wisdom of the Spirit, because they were not wise, they were not mighty, they were not noble, they were foolish, weak, base, and despised. These men were chosen by God to confound those considered to be wise. That's why we have also shared the thought, and this also runs completely contrary to what is often taught, that Samson, a judge of Israel, Samson was not a hulking brute of a man. He was likely a 98-pound runt of a man that absolutely confounded the Philistines. How can this little guy beat us all up? How does he do that? And that's why it was such a mission of theirs to find out what was the secret of his strength. The secret of his strength was that God was empowering him. And this is the same thing. This is God's pattern with the Hebrews. The Hebrew is to appear weak so that the strength of them can only be attributed to the power of God. Why did God choose such men? 1 Corinthians 1:29.
1 Corinthians 1:29, that no flesh should glory in his, God's, presence.
So my note here is the called to be saints were instructed, take no glory in men. Don't be impressed in men, and don't try to impress other men. Why were the called to be saints? Not to glory in men. So being men, and so we know what it's like to be a man. Being men, they could glory in the things of worldly wise men. This is something that we're all susceptible to. We see somebody that is successful in this world, that has amassed a lot of stuff and appears to have much in the way of riches. That we're susceptible to glorying in what we see. Paul instructed them to glory in something else. And this is what he said. And Colleen, we're going to read Jeremiah 9 in just a moment. So we'll look first at 1 Corinthians.
1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 31. That, according as it is written, he that glorieth, let him glory in the Lord.
Okay, so this is something to the Hebrews. Paul is referring to what has been said by a Hebrew prophet, Jeremiah, and in Jeremiah chapter 9, verses 23 and 24, we have the following words. Colleen, if you could read that.
I'll ask her to unmute.
Unmute and read in a big voice.
Can you hear me? Hello?
Yeah, a little bit.
Oh, okay.
Good.
Good. Can you hear that better?
Yeah, that's
great.
better.
Go ahead.
Thus saith the Lord, let not the wise man glory in his wisdom, neither let the mighty man glory in his might. Let not the rich man glory in his riches, but let him that glorieth glory in this, that he understandeth and knoweth me, that I am the Lord, which exercise loving kindness, judgment, and righteousness in the earth. For in these things I delight, saith the Lord.
Thank you, Colleen. That was fantastic.
Well
Okay.
read.
Yes, well done. So this is the point, and if this is something that I think for me is very valuable to learn. The glory is to go to the Lord, is to go to God, which means then that man, the Hebrew man, is to look and to come across as incapable, inept, not noble, weak, despised. They are not to be of any worldly strength. That's the Hebrew. The Hebrew is the one to point the world to God. So the question that the Hebrew should elicit from people is, how are you able to do this? You're nothing. I can look at you. What is your success? What's the secret to it? And the secret is God. And that's what would point the world so that all of us can be saved, to see what God is capable of, because he does it in the Hebrew. That's a very important lesson for me. Thank you, Colleen. All right, let's move forward. Now, why should those Hebrew Gentile men called to be saints be instructed to glory in the Lord? Now, Paul informs them, all things are yours. So then we say, what all things? Not all things of the world. Now, notice this. This is important because he's making a distinction here of things that are of the world, but the things that are freely given of God. Now, we have to go all the way back to 1 Corinthians chapter 2 to remember this. Here we have, Vivian.
1 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 12. Now we have received not the spirit of the world, but the Spirit which is of God, that we might know the things that are freely given to us of God.
Okay, so the call to be saints have received not the spirit of the world, but they've received the Spirit which is of God. And they have received the things which are freely given to us of God. So my audience, our audience here, the call to be saints, are being instructed. That's where their focus is to be, on the things that are freely given to us of God. Now, are these all things of God valued and desired of all men? My response would be no. Why would I say no? Because of 1 Corinthians 2:14, which reads,
It's part A.
Part A.
1 Corinthians chapter 2, 14a. But the natural man receiveth not the things of the Spirit of God.
Okay. So now we see the distinction. Paul is telling the call to be saints, they are to value and they are to desire the things that are freely given of God, but these things are not of any value to the natural man. The natural man isn't interested in those things that the call to be saint was to, in fact, take his strength. Therefore, now we come to the conclusion. Therefore, let no man glory in men. So we've already elaborated, that is, don't be impressed in what you see of men in the world. He says, for all things are yours. Now, what are the all things? That are freely given to us of God. That's 1 Corinthians 2:12b. Those are the all things. They're freely given to the called to be saints of God. And then Paul goes on and elaborate. He says, whether of Paul or Apollos or Cephas even, or the world or life or death or things present or things to come, Paul declares, all are yours. And ye are Christ's, and Christ is God's. And we say, wow. All partakers of the benefit said, amen. Okay, so we've completed now 1 Corinthians chapter 3, and we're going to move straight on in the time remaining. We've still got time. We'll move into chapter 4. 1 Corinthians chapter 4, wherefore I beseech you, be ye followers of me. That's 1 Corinthians 4:16.
1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. Let a man so account of us as of the ministers of Christ and stewards of the mysteries of God. Moreover, it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful. But with me, it is a very small thing that I should be judged of you or of man's judgment. Yea, I judge not mine own self. For I know nothing by myself. Yet am I not hereby justified, but he that judgeth me is the Lord. Therefore, judge nothing before the time until the Lord come, who will both bring to light the hidden things of darkness, and will make manifest the counsels of the hearts. And then shall every man have praise of God.
Okay, so let's move. We're moving into 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 1. Let a man so account of us as the ministers of Christ. Now, that word minister is a servant, an attendant, one who acts under the authority of another. Paul acted under the authority of Jesus the Christ, and he carried out the executive duties as an agent. He was a representative of Jesus Christ, his superior. So he was a minister of Christ, and moreover, he was a steward. Now, a steward is one who manages the affairs of an estate on behalf of his employer. So Paul is employed by Jesus the Christ. He's a minister and he's a steward. And then Paul goes on to say, of the mysteries of God. Now, we know of the mystery, but now Paul speaks of the mysteries, plural, of God. So was Paul a steward of multiple mysteries? Well, let's take a look. So this is concise. It's not meant to be exhaustive, but just to give all of us a sense of the mysteries of God that God gave to Paul. They included blindness in part is happened to Israel. That's Romans 11:25. Another mystery is the preaching of Jesus Christ, Romans 16:25. Another mystery, the hidden wisdom, our glory, 1 Corinthians 2:7. So I have these references here. You can make note of them, and then you can go and you can read. We won't take time to go through these mysteries at this point. Otherwise, we'd never get through 1 Corinthians. Another mystery, we shall not all sleep, but we shall all be changed. That's 1 Corinthians 15:51. Another mystery, the mystery of his will, according to his good pleasure. That's Ephesians 1:9. Then there is the fellowship of the mystery, Ephesians 3:9. I mean, I could say something about all of these, but suffice to say, we're just looking that Paul had multiple mysteries of which he was a steward. There is the mystery of the gospel, Ephesians 6:19. This mystery among the Gentiles, which is Christ in you, that's Colossians 1:27. Another mystery, the mystery of God and of the Father and of Christ, that was given to Paul to be a steward of, Colossians 2:2. Now, the point of it being a mystery is it is not to be found in the scriptures of the prophets. The prophets didn't write about these mysteries. They were not revealed until they were revealed by God through Paul. Another mystery, the mystery of iniquity, 2 Thessalonians 2:7, which Paul says it's already working. This was not known by the prophets. It was revealed through Paul. And then there is the mystery of godliness, 1 Timothy 3:16. So this is just a quick list of the mysteries of which Paul was a steward. Moreover, now we're moving into verses 2 to 4 of chapter 4. Moreover, it is required in stewards that a man be found faithful. Now, steward again, that is one who manages the affairs of an estate on behalf of his employer. So Paul is employed by Jesus the Christ, and he is expected to be faithful as that steward. But with me, it is a very small thing that I should be judged of you, or of man's judgment. Yea, I judge not mine own self. Now, Paul is going to make a very important statement, and it's a very simple statement, but I'll share with you ahead that this statement seems to have baffled biblical scholarship, but we'll look at it now. So Paul says, "For I know nothing by myself, yet I am not hereby justified." Now, scholarship has suggested to change the word by. They don't like the word by. To them, the sentence doesn't make sense. For I know nothing by myself. They want to change that word by, right, which occurs right here, to the word against. And they want to change the word. They recommend changing the word, which you'll find different wording in the New King James, in the NIV. Virtually every version of the Bible has changed the word by to the word against, because that would make better sense to them. But Paul says, this is a very simple thing. He says, I know nothing by myself. What Paul is saying is, I don't know anything. He says, but I am not hereby. That doesn't justify me. That the things that I'm saying, just because I don't know them, they're being revealed to him by God. Paul doesn't know these things. And that's why I've declared as well, I don't know anything. The only things I know are the things that I see in Scripture. Paul says, I know nothing by myself. Now, scholarship wants to change it because they see this colon and they say, but he that judgeth me is the Lord. Now, the reason that this makes sense is going to become more apparent by the time we get to verse 7. So all Paul is saying is, I know nothing by myself. And the reason is it's being revealed to him by God. It has nothing to do with him knowing something. Paul knew lots of things against himself. He knew that he was a blasphemer. He knew that he had sinned, that he had done tremendously wrong against God. He knew lots of things against himself, but he didn't know anything by himself. Therefore, judge nothing before the time until the Lord come. So Paul is saying, there's a day coming. The Lord is going to come. This is the day of Christ. That'll be the time when we are all caught up to the heavenly places. Who will bring to light the hidden things of darkness and will make manifest the counsels of the heart. This is when God is going to judge.
Ben,
time.
before
Yes.
you go on, if you don't mind, just you've spoken before about the OED definitions of judge. So in this verse and in the preceding one, he uses the word judge. And could you just comment on that? Because I think, in our modern vernacular, judge is thought of a certain way that may not coincide with what the word meant back when it was written.
Okay, very good question, Neil. So in fact, we're not talking about a judge that would like adjudicate. There is the God is going to judge. He's going to separate the good from the bad. He will judge, but the time that Paul is using the word judge here is to assess. That is not so much in a legal format, but just to use discernment, to use discretion in understanding those things that are good and those things that are bad. So the judge that Paul is using here that we're reading of is the judge when one would decide if something is appropriate or inappropriate. And we do that today. We do judgment all through our day. Things that are good, things that are not so good. We try to stay away from the bad. We try to focus on the things that we have discerned are helpful. So that's the word judge. Now, God will judge, and he's going to judge very specifically the works, the service of the saints and the called to be saints. And he's going to judge them for the basis of rewards. And that's why Paul talks about rejoicing in the day of Christ, the day of that judgment.
Did we answer that question?
Yeah, so okay, so now note the time. So that it's the time the Lord will come and every called to be saint will have praise of God. All will rejoice that he did not run, neither labored in vain, or say he did not labor futilely, he labored productively. And so Paul does say every man, that would be every called to be saint, will have the praise of God. Okay, let's move into now verses 6 and 7.
1 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 6 and 7. And these things, brethren, I have in a figure transferred to myself and to Apollos for your sakes, that ye might learn in us not to think of men above that which is written, that no one of you be puffed up one for another against another. Puffed up for one against another. I read
Yes,
that wrong.
yes.
For who maketh thee to differ from another? And what hast thou that thou didst not receive? Now, if thou didst receive it, why dost thou glory as if thou hadst not received it?
So now we remember that Paul says, I know nothing by myself. So let's look now what he says in these verses 6 and 7. And these things, brethren, I have in a figure transferred to myself and to Apollos for your sakes. And there's a connected thought, that ye might learn in us not to think of men above that which is written. Paul says, I know nothing by myself. Don't think of me above that which is written, that no one of you be puffed up for one against the other. Now that word puffed up, this is true also for believers of the partakers of the benefit, for believers today, not to be puffed up. So we're all equal before the Lord, regardless of anything. Now, this matter of being puffed up, that is to be inflated with vanity, pride, ambition, to cause, and all, there's also an understanding to swell with anger. But this one right now, we're dealing with puffed up with pride. So they were not to think themselves better than another because they knew something. Paul says, I know nothing. I'm a figure for you to observe. Don't be impressed with me, because by myself, I know nothing. By yourself, you know nothing. All we know is that which is written. We have come, and they've received illumination from God, and they know something, but that is not a basis to be puffed up. Paul says, and these things, brethren, I have in a figure transferred to myself and to Apollos for your sake. So Paul writes, let a man so account of us. So now what's Paul's point? He's saying here in verse 7, so then neither is he that planteth anything, neither is he that watereth, but God that giveth the increase. Paul is saying, don't be impressed in what I'm doing, because I'm not anything. I'm the one, Paul's the one that planted. He says, I'm not anything. Apollos is the one that watered. Paul is saying Apollos is nothing. It's God that's doing this work. So Paul says, don't get puffed up against each other. Paul is the one that planted. Apollos is the one that watered. And Paul is making the point to the call to be saints that in their standing before God, they're all the same. So neither is he anything. Paul says, I'm nothing.
Don't judge one another.
And don't judge one another. Exactly the point. So he says, I've transferred in a figure to myself and to Apollos for your sake. So he says, I'm using myself as an example to you for your sakes. Now, Paul's point, therefore, let no man glory in men. So they were not to be impressed with Paul. They say, wow, they weren't to be impressed with, no, they would. Paul says, don't be impressed with me because I know nothing by myself. Paul's point serves what purpose? 1 Corinthians 6:4-6b. Go ahead, my love.
1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 6b, that ye might learn in us not to think of men above that which is written, that no one of you be puffed up for one against another.
Okay, so it's a very simple, it's a very simple point, but scholarship has made it very difficult to understand. The point is very simple, that Paul says, what I know because God has given it to me. And what you know for the same reason God has given it to you. We are not to be puffed up one against another. Don't glory in men. We're all the same. And we today, as partakers of the benefit, we are all equal. None of us are somehow to be puffed up over another, that we know something, or that we understand something, or that somehow we're gooder than another because of what we know. Okay. Now he says that ye, so it's the call to be saints, might learn, that ye might learn in us, that would be Paul and Apollos, not to think of men above that which is written. Now, here's what's written, Romans 3:10.
Romans 3:10, as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. Psalm 14, verses 2 and 3, the Lord looked down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any that did understand and seek God. They are all gone aside. They are all together become filthy. There is none that doeth good, no, not one. Romans 3:23 and verse 27a. Verse 23, for all have sinned and come short of the glory of God. And verse 27a, where is boasting then? It is excluded.
Okay, so the lesson for me here is that I'm nothing. Paul is saying that he's nothing. Everything is from God. And so all of us are to take comfort in this and to be encouraged by this and to be built up by it, that we're all the same. We're not going to be separated in the heavenly places by some rewards or gifts or something of that nature, where somebody is going to be made to be glorified over another. That's not the case. Paul has said he's nothing. He knows nothing by himself. He told the call to be saints exactly the same thing, and it comes to us as well. We're all the same in God's eyes. The glory goes to God. Okay, who maketh thee to differ from another? Paul asked the words. And what hast thou that thou didst not receive? And now, if thou didst receive it, why dost thou glory, as if thou hadst not received it? So Paul wrote here, 1 Corinthians 4:3b and 4a, he wrote, yea, I judge not mine own self, for I know nothing by myself. Paul made himself a figure for the call to be saints. Both they and he received all their knowledge from the Lord. And on that basis, they were all equal. Now, Paul did have authority over them as their apostle, but they were still equal in the eyes of the Lord in terms of who they were, what they knew, matters of that nature. So we note again, that's what was in verse 6. Okay, so I think we'll end the study there. We won't go into verses 8 to 13 because now it'll actually shift our attention away from what has been said. And we've probably done enough at this point. So next time we'll pick up at verse 8.